Ready to talk about the changes in an ADHD brain? We've got neurotransmitters, modulators, and structural stuff galore. Hi, it's Brain Bites with me, Dr. B. I'm Jessica Beachkofsky, your friendly online psychiatrist. Let's dig in. ADHD. It's a problem in kids that often stays a problem in adults. So can't we just run a test for this? Well, like most of psych and much of medicine in general, there's no simple genetic test or biomarkers we can look for to make a diagnosis. We do know that ADHD is highly heritable, but way more than just a few genes are involved, so we have to scrap that dream test for now. So instead, let's start by talking about the neurotransmitters dopamine and norepinephrine, because we know these two play significant roles in the pathophysiology and treatment of ADHD. Dopamine is so important in the brain for regulating attention, motivation, reward processing, and motor control. It's a neuromodulator that affects the activity of neurons and circuits in the brain. Dopamine pathways are primarily located in the brain's midbrain region, including the substantia nigra and ventral tegmental area. And they project out to various areas such as the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. We know that dysregulation of dopamine pathways is common in ADHD and commonly creates problems with symptoms related to inattention and impulsivity. And messed up dopamine is also implicated in other brain disorders like schizophrenia and Parkinson's disease. Researchers have also found that there are genetic variations in some of the dopamine receptor genes, especially for the D2 receptors. These variations can affect performance on tasks requiring sustained attention, leading to errors and inconsistent effort. Norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter involved in attention, arousal, and the stress response. And it also plays a role in mood regulation and memory. It's produced in the brainstem's locus coeruleus and projects widely throughout the brain. Norepinephrine especially influences the limbic system and the cerebral cortex. If there are imbalances in norepinephrine levels, it can lead to trouble maintaining attention and managing stress, which are commonly seen in ADHD. Problems with norepinephrine are also seen in depression and anxiety. Researchers have found genetic variations with the norepitransporter gene, which can affect reaction time variability. Dopamine and norepi also modulate entire brain circuits by altering the states of their target circuits or areas. This means they can switch the functions of these networks depending on what's needed, which ultimately can affect consciousness, emotions, and physical movements. This modulation is flexible and reversible and part of normal brain functioning. But it's also implicated in mental health issues. There's a lot of talk about brains and neurotransmitters, but some of what we describe certain brain chemicals doing is actually neuromodulation. What's the difference, you ask? Well, let me explain a little more about neurotransmitters versus neuromodulators. The main differences are their speed and duration of action. Neurotransmitters act quickly and very briefly, while neuromodulators have slower and more long-lasting effects. Neurotransmitters also typically have specific target neurons, whereas neuromodulators impact a larger network of neurons. Neurotransmitters are released from the presynaptic neuron into the synaptic cleft, which is the space between the pre- and the postsynaptic neurons. They bind to receptors on the postsynaptic neuron, directly affecting that neuron and causing rapid changes, leading to the transmission of nerve impulses or signals. This process is synaptic transmission and has quick onset and short duration. Examples of neurotransmitters include acetylcholine, dopamine, serotonin, GABA, and norepinephrine. On the other hand, neuromodulators don't directly send a message to a single neuron. Instead, they modulate the overall activity of neurotransmitters by binding to receptors that influence the release or uptake of neurotransmitters, the sensitivity of receptors, or the overall excitability of neurons. This modulation can enhance or inhibit synaptic transmission and typically results in slower, longer-lasting effects. Neuromodulators can affect a broader range of neurons or entire brain regions through volume transmission, as they're not confined just to the synaptic cleft. They can act both inside and outside the synapse. So that was on the tiny chemical side of things, but there are brain differences that researchers can also see with neurostructural and functional imaging. Overall, ADHD brains have less total brain volume in cortical and subcortical areas. They also have reduced gray matter density, so not as many neurons. Some areas of the brain have decreased cortical thickness when compared to neurotypical brains. There are also some issues with delayed brain development, but these will usually catch up by about age 25. And this is another theory of ADHD, that it's caused by delayed development in maturing areas of the brain. Researchers have also found that kids have more widespread differences seen on functional MRI tasks than adults. For adults, almost all of the decreased activity or hypoactivation is in the frontoparietal network, and it's not somatomotor. Some areas of the brain showed lower connectivity, like in the thalamus, out to several other areas in the prefrontal cortex. Here's one of my favorite theories, which implicates inconsistent DMN suppression that impairs executive and behavioral regulation. So the DMN is the default mode network, right? That's your daydreaming network. So when you're not doing a task, the DMN is on, and that means your mind can just wander around and you're not really focused on doing a thing. If there's less connectivity in the DMN, there may be failure to suppress, and the reduced connectivity between the frontoparietal, executive control, and the ventral attention, which is the salience networks, then we have a lot of problems. The salience network is like the switch that tells the DMN to go on or off, whether or not there's a task that needs to be completed. So, if we have problems with that switch and the DMN functioning when it's supposed to, we may get that daydreamy state in people with ADHD when they are supposed to be working on a task. Very interesting stuff. Most likely, there's a highly diverse presentation of people with ADHD because there are different deficits in lots of different core functions. This is a lot of information about what's going on upstairs and what might look a little different in a brain with ADHD. There are neurotransmitter and neuromodulation changes in dopamine and norepinephrine, structural and functional differences in the DMN and the salience network, altered activity in the limbic and cortical networks, and all of that can show up as attentional and impulsive problems in people diagnosed with ADHD. Now that you have a better understanding of what's going on inside that old brain box, it can be easier to explain to others so that they can choose a more effective and aligned treatment option. And one of the best non-pharmaceutical treatments for ADHD is psychoeducation. But that's all information for another talk. I hope your brain is filled with just the right amount of dopamine and norepinephrine. No stimulants required. Be sure to grab more tasty tidbits at brainbiteswithdrb.com. Enjoy!